for a job, so he doesn't want to be a fool in front of everybody. I can afford it. I have tenure. Okay.
So, one quick announcement. We're having an extra office hours today at 4:30, just because a lot of people wanted it, and not that many people seem to want the office hours on Thursday.
Yeah, because on Thursday the homework has already happened.
Right. So
right.
Moving it to Tuesday when more people can use it.
Right. Oh, thank you very much. Yes. So today there is mine 1 to 2, and then yours 4 to.
I have 2 today. There's one right after class, and there's one at 4:30.
Oh, okay. So super office hours. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. I will see if the room is available at a different time, then maybe. But yeah, we can try to. We'll talk about. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. So let's see what are the announcements. The homework is due tonight. The homeworks actually are due tonight. The grading for these homeworks is due by the end of the week, because I cannot ask anything later, right? But I set the official ending date for the submissions Monday night. Okay. For those of you who are doing the project, I ask that you sign up on I posted all of this on Piazza, but I made a sign up sheet because I want to count how many final presentations there are. So people doing the project need to give a final demo essentially of their project during the final exam. The final exam is going to be Monday at 12. I posted the timing on the class homepage, but it's the standard time, at which the registrar's office schedules the final exam. I'm a little bit sorry it's on Monday. I would have thought I would, give people time until Tuesday or Wednesday. But during the week, it's basically impossible to find other good rooms for exams out of the scheduled time, because all the classes are having exams. So we have to stick to the Monday time for the final presentations. And I set the final time for submitting the code of the project to Monday night. Okay, so people doing the project have to upload the code via CrowdGrader. Not because there is going to be any crowd grading, I'm going to grade it with the TA, and we're going to listen to the presentations and look at the code ourselves. It's simply that CrowdGrader has a nice way, because I designed it, of accepting group submissions. It works this way. I repeat it for the benefit of people doing the project. Can you raise your hand if you're doing the project out in this class, just out of curiosity? Okay. So if you work with another person, you do this. Suppose I work with Elizabeth, okay? Luca has to invite Elizabeth. When Luca invites Elizabeth, Elizabeth gets an email that says, hey, Luca invited you to work with him. No, actually, it doesn't know the gender CrowdGrader. Luca invited you to work with Luca or something like that. I don't remember how I worded it. But and then you have two links. Click here to confirm, or go click here to edit the group membership. If you confirm, what happens is that essentially Elizabeth is inviting Luca back, and then Luca and Elizabeth are in the same group. The general idea is that the two people are in the same group if they invite each other, so that you cannot tag along without permission from the rest of the group, right? That's the basic idea. So you cannot simply say, oh, did you list me? Yes. Like in conference papers, somehow you can be a co-author if the other person lists you, but you may not have anything to do yourself. You will see if you ever submit scientific papers. Because, there is not so much incentive. I mean, usually people include you only if you want to be included, I guess. But instead in homework, it's not enough that people include you. You have to be included. You have to accept, because maybe you wanted to submit your own version. That was the idea of CrowdGrader, right? Maybe you wanted to do your own thing instead. So there needs to be this mutual confirmation, after which anybody in the group can upload a version, and the last version is the one that counts. Still, it's usually better to communicate by email, SMS, or chat, or whatever you want, who's uploading the project, obviously, so that if somebody does a last-minute bug fix, you're not going to overwrite it by uploading an older version. So, but this is essentially how it works. Okay, so you have to do this, and you have to upload the project. There is no grading. And we will download the packages and do the grading for the final project. So to repeat, 2 homeworks due tonight, the grading due Monday. There is a sign-up sheet for the final presentations. I need people to sign up for the final presentation just because I want to count how many presentations there are, so that if I need to make any arrangements, I can make them now ahead of time, okay? So there is a sign-up sheet for final project presentations. And people who do the project need to do the presentation on Monday during the exam time and then submit the project on Monday night or early if they wish, obviously, okay? And everybody is welcome to come to the final project presentations. I hope they will be fun, and I hope they will give some idea of what can be done. This code. I mean, everybody's member of Code Grader has access. So even though there is no grading, you can pretend that you do reviews. So if you want to look at people's project code, that's one way to get it, actually. And if you want to get it in a better way, projects can volunteer. I hope that people who don't mind, will upload their project code in some place. I mean, some people may want to do it for profit, but otherwise, if they put it up on GitHub or Bitbucket or some such place, it would be fun for others to see how they did it and maybe contribute if the project is fun or whatever, okay? So this is it for the official announcements. The other non-official announcement is this. I'm somehow, because these classes have projects, etc., I always run them in a way in which I explain a lot of things at the beginning of the class, and at some point I run out of things to say. Not really run out of things to say, but so today I want to explain to you a bit about photos and map. But there is a point in which, when you study Android, in which you have done most of the basics, okay? And at that point, yes, you can learn new stuff, but basically you can also learn it by yourself. At this point, you should be able to make sense of the documentation, so that if instead of camera and map, you would need to do, I don't know, whatever else that we need to do. I don't know, we did quite a few things actually, but NFC, say, the proximity communication, or Bluetooth. You would, at this point, you should be able to look at the documentation and sort of make sense of it. To tell you the truth, that's also what I have to do, and I have to do it all the time because, for example, the interface to Maps changed markedly from the first time I used it. When I used it the first time, the interface to Maps was still done in an older way. Then this is now wrapped into Google Play, and so it works in a different way. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to do a bit of a formal part of the class, and then I actually want to do a discussion on any topic that might interest you related to what is the scope of the conversation. I think it can be Android development, Android plus cloud development, so developing also the portion of the cloud, anything related to building I call them products, meaning that they are these things that are made of applications, back-end services, and they're meant to have users and deliver a useful experience or product to people. So anything related to that, both even things that are mildly related. So how to organize the service overall, how to organize it, the company, where to host it, how it is done. Anything that you may want to ask, I think is game at this point of the class. It's I think it's the payoff for having gone a little bit faster at the beginning, really. I'm not sure I will record always these times, because to give you more straightforward advice, it might be better that I don't always put it up public on YouTube. So, or else, I don't know, or else I'll make it accessible by link only from UCSC, one of these two things. I just don't want to go, publicly dissing, other people's products if I have to. Okay. So this is generally what I will be doing this time. If there are requests for what you want me to talk about next time, Thursday, let me know. Okay. Any question at this point before I start? Yeah.
Will you ever talk about anything to do with iOS, or are we just going to always talk about Android?
No, I'm not going to talk about iOS. The main reason is that I don't know very much about iOS development. I want to pick it up. I will pick it up, but in this moment, I'm a little bit too busy. If you want to know what I'm busy with, I'm essentially busy with a bit of Android. I'm doing research and I'm doing more work that is Python based. And as the new thing that I'm sort of learning, because I always like to keep something that I don't know that I'm actually learning, there are some complicated things in machine learning and deep learning that I'm actually want to write code and play with. And there is also some other project on which I'm writing code that is, again, a research project which has to do with verification of very complex data pipelines. These problems of when you set up a very big data pipeline, you get data continuously that goes through it, and then something changes because maybe somebody working with you checks in some code that makes it work in a different way, even though you don't realize. And how do you check that something? Let me make an example. It's not applied to these necessarily, okay? But let me make an example that you build a moderation system for Wikipedia. And you get in all kind of inputs, all kind of inputs from your tool and from other tools about what is the reputation of users that do the edits, what are the edits, what are the times, what are these, what are that. And at some point, unknown to you, because you're using maybe many data sources, somebody changes their API and starts to give you data in a different way, and you don't necessarily know, because you're not watching all the time what happens to your data inputs. And so how to detect that, today your system is doing differently because those numerical data are either missing or different or have a different, frequency distribution than before, essentially. So between all these things, this is what keeps me busy. Now, if you want to take an iOS class, I know that Roberto Manducchi, who is a professor in computer engineering, wanted and used to perhaps teach a class that I think would be incredibly interesting and complementary. That is, he wanted to use iOS to teach sensor fusion. Sensor fusion, I don't know if I may talk about it a little bit next time or so, but it's this. Just to give an advertisement of the problem, I don't know if when he's planning to teach the class, but suppose that you want to know where your phone is. He really wants to do it in part for these location problems. Suppose you want to know where the phone is, so that I can know that if I point it like this, I point it to the TH air, and I can label TH air, and then in a virtual reality kind of system, I see TH air when I point the phone in this way. But suppose that your problem is to know the position of phone in space in its 6 variables. What are the 6 variables? X, Y, Z of the position and the 3 angles that denote the phone orientation. Okay, so there are 6 parameters in the end. So the problem is this, that you have more than 6 sources of information. It's not that you have a sensor that gives you X, Y, Z and theta, phi, psi, or whatever they're called. Okay. You have more than that. So in particular, you have data from the gravity sensor, the accelerometers, okay? Then you have data from the gyroscope that tells you the angular accelerations. Then you have data from the location sensor that gives you the lat long and the elevation, but with imprecision. Then you have data from the magnetic compass, okay? That gives you again 3 angles. That have a different source of error. If you put it close to a mass, my car keys could deviate it, but otherwise, but it has longer-term consistency. If you only integrate the gyroscope from the angular acceleration, so this is not a very good gyroscope. It's not like the ones in planes or satellites. So if you shake the phone for a while, it sort of loses. The integration errors accumulate, and in the end, it's not so good, right? So you have many sensors, and you need to know, given all this sensor input, how do you reconstruct a highest likelihood approximation of the truth? Okay, and this is a very interesting mathematical problem. I am a half expert only. I'm perhaps slightly more than half, perhaps, but I think Roberto does it instead quite often in his field of research. And so he really wanted to teach a class on this and on iOS, and I hope he does, or otherwise if you pester him enough, maybe he will do it. Okay, it would be very interesting to be able to offer both classes here in the School of Engineering. I think at some point I want to learn iOS development. I've always been, so I don't know if I'll do it this summer though, maybe. essentially, I'm always a little bit in doubt because so what is my perspective on Android versus iOS development? Originally, I wanted to develop for Android for a couple of reasons, as I told you. First of all, it's easier to teach in the School of Engineering. One thing that I wanted for a very long time is to have a laptop requirement for students, so that everybody would have a laptop that is powerful enough to take all the classes. And because we have a laptop requirement, we would get a discount from manufacturers, so that we would even have laptops for free to give to the students who need it for financial, as financial help. Actually, I negotiated this for the whole university some years ago. What I negotiated, I want to tell you informally, but it's going to be in the video, but I don't care. What I negotiated were discounts such that everybody would get a 15% discount, and the 10% of the students would get the laptop for free, because as financial aid. And then this was supported so that if your laptop broke, we could give you a loaner immediately, because ITS would have enough of them to give us loaners. You want to know why this didn't work? Because if it's a requirement, it would have raised the official cost of an education at UCSC. And so we would have looked worse compared to other UCs. And so in the end, it was decided not to do that because of this reason. In my opinion, it was a missed occasion. And I think we are going to try to do it again, either for CS only or maybe for the School of Engineering only, once we have a new dean. We are waiting for a new dean. These things need to be discussed with the dean. And the current dean is serving on a temporary basis while we are in the process of hiring another dean. Yes?
I do know that a friend of mine got a laptop for free under financial aid, so it is possible.
It is possible, but it's not the case that everybody has the same. And so, for example, Film and Digital Media prescribes Macs to everybody. You may counter the choice, but they're saying that this is an Apple monopoly. But actually, I feel I will be the same. But Macs are very powerful. They are very fast. And if you have a Mac, you can develop for iOS and Android. So in a sense, that's good, I guess.
How long do you take to have it? So maybe all that stuff is past.
A couple of years. Yeah. Too long for you. Yeah, it's for the future. I mean, these things are slow. Yeah. And we should have a new dean in the fall, I think, at the end of the fall. Yeah. But I mean, the new dean is not the requirement, the main requirement. It's only that, this is something that needs agreement from the various departments. Or our department has to decide to go alone, which is not a great idea given how many students from different departments take classes, right? So.
I think they're kind of less in the hands of Apple itself, because if you think about it, Apple is the company that's kind of pulling the strings on this one. If you want to develop for Apple, the barrier to entry is very high. You have to buy all of their products, which are very expensive, as opposed to Android, which you can use pretty much whatever kind of computer you want. And the phone that you're developing for costs only like, what, $40, as opposed to an iPhone, which costs like, what, $500?
Yes, so you're repeating exactly all the reasons why I chose Android, right? And moreover, there is another reason why I chose Android. The other reason is this, that as I mentioned to you at the beginning, and this might be sort of the tougher thing to do when you develop apps, but I think that, so there is the unfortunate dichotomy, that we always think locally, and so we live next to Silicon Valley, but Android actually has the greatest leverage in the places where there are no other forms of computing around. Okay, so the reach of Android is billions of people for which Android is really the first real computer experience that they're gonna have. Okay, and so. In my mind, Android has this incredible potential of bringing computing to billions of people who haven't had it before, okay? And that's the biggest promise and the biggest interest. So the only problem with it is that if you're gonna, it's hard sitting here in Silicon Valley to develop apps and services that are really useful for the people who live in other places. Okay, because you don't know what they need, essentially. You will need to spend some time and live there maybe for a couple of years, figure out what is needed there, and maybe do a startup based locally there, but you're using your knowledge here, where then you live once you figure out what to do is not so important. But you need to know what a society needs in order in order to do something useful. Let me give an example, okay, of something that that I heard some people are doing. These people are sort of, I heard of them in one of these meetups for developers and startups. These people are in India, and they develop some way to use very low bandwidth things like SMSs or Android apps that run locally to do the following thing. A common thing there is that some member of the family works in the city, and the rest of stay of the family, or maybe the parents, are in a village. And the person in the city is making money and wants to send back a remittance, right? And here in the US, it would be easy, right? Because what do? Well, you log in onto your bank and you transfer money between two accounts, I guess. But there, there is no bank in the village, essentially. And so what these people are doing are ways in order to create short but secret codes over SMS that you can send. And when the guy receives in the village, there is a person in the village that acts as bookkeeper. And when they receive certain codes, they know that they can hand out so many rupees to the person. And so essentially, these ways to do low-cost, mobile-based banking transfers for people who send money home. And how to do these things, you cannot invent from here. First, you wouldn't know exactly the need. And second, you wouldn't know exactly what are the cultural basis. In a company, there is a technical part and there is a cultural part. That is, how the product meshes with the local cultural and usage. And the local and customs part is the hardest to get right, in my opinion, because after a while, as computer scientists, after a while, we know how to develop basically a lot of the things that make the thing work. I don't think that the difficulty there in this company is particularly technical. We all know how to hash numbers and create secret keys and send some information. Or if we don't know, it's not that hard to figure out. The hardest thing to figure out is essentially how to build this network of local people that then accepts it and does all these things. So I think this company now is doing fairly well, but now I forgot how they essentially decided to choose the people in the local village. I don't know if they decided to choose a local doctor or something like that, but they had some way of picking the right person in each village to help kickstart these so that they would use it, okay? So this is just an example, but essentially it's a bit hard from here to know how to do a startup that affects people very far away. But I think there is a little bit of this dream, that, and it's also maybe presumption, that we will be the ones who do it. It's more likely to be the people who live there that will be doing it. But essentially, I'm looking forward somewhat to this revolution in which computing will go from 20% of humanity to an 80%, something like that. Now, the flip side to this is that as I develop for Android, but I see what is available on iOS, etc., I noticed that even though the situation for Android is improving, it's somewhat true that people on iOS, you read it on all the statistics, people on iOS use their phone more, they buy more, they use it more. And this may be for a combination of two reasons. One is that, they're wealthier, and so they have more money to spend, I guess, and so they buy more stuff on the phone. Even though I sort of doubt that this is the whole story, because many of these apps on the phone are so inexpensive that I think, that, people who buy a can of beer can also buy an app on the phone. I don't think really there is a difference there. But I think that the difference is maybe that due to a different UI, it might be easier to discover things and use them. I'm often surprised at how fragmented the space in Android is, and it may not be all that facilitating doing new things necessarily. But I'm not an expert on that. Okay, so anyway, long discussion. Let me get to some serious things so that I can say that I did something for the class, and then maybe let's begin again chatting about various topics. Entire screen share. Okay. So picture and video. So I have these. Okay, so suppose you want to take photos. I just want to tell you briefly how to do this. So there are two ways of doing it. One is not to do it. So essentially you use the camera app to take photos for you. This is actually a really good solution if you just want to take a photo, okay? Because it's actually really boring coding to do a good camera app. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily too boring, but the cameras used to be simple, but now are complicated, right? In a camera, you can do many things. You can decide how the flash should behave, exposure compensation, if any. Would you like to zoom or would you not like to zoom? Would you like to, etc., etc. So the number of options is increasing. Not only the number of options is increasing, but one of the main headaches is this, that different phones have different options, okay? Very different options. So some of the difference is in the image size, but some of the difference is also that really these cameras have a different set of things you can do. You know, some have flash, some others don't. Most phones have a forward and back-facing camera, so you have to choose which one. But some phones or some tablets don't. And so writing some software that gracefully is able to cope with all kinds of cameras via the phone API is a very big headache. This is one of the reasons, actually, that iOS development is easier. If you develop for iOS, you have a finite and small number of devices that you need to develop for. If you develop for Android, then you have a very large and unbounded number set of devices. Okay, and I mean, I know in particular for camera, for this startup that I helped, that you know has to use the camera to take like a webcam like thing, and so you know the variety of cameras is just maddening essentially, because manufacturers build their own software. It's often not standard software that comes with Android. You know, they have their own camera chip and they have their own hard drivers that have different bugs and different characteristics. And if you want to do it well, it's difficult. For example, you know, how much does it take to take a photo? Okay, I mean, maybe in your app you want the photo back in a certain way. Okay, how long does it take before you get it back? It's all different. Okay, where is the shutter button on the image itself is or on the side? This you have to decide. I mean, it's all complicated. So the best thing you do if you can is not to do it. So if you don't want to do it, you have to say that so if you say uses feature Android hardware camera, this essentially makes your app available only to phones that have cameras. Okay. I was wondering once upon a time why it's a good idea to do this. So let me say, in general, uses feature is a way to limit the distribution of your Android application only to phones that have some features. You can say uses feature accelerometers, uses feature camera, etc. Why is this a good idea? Because you think, you know, people will not be so stupid to download a camera application if they don't have a camera on the phone. Well, no, think again. People are that stupid. Not only they're that stupid, but if they do it and discover that it doesn't work, they will give you a negative review. Okay? Oh, it just doesn't work on my phone. Okay, yeah, big deal. You know, you have no camera, but they still do it. Okay? So what you can do is this. You can essentially ask the phone. Maybe you should shut off those lights. You can ask the camera app of the phone that at least knows how the camera of the phone is, because it was done often by the camera manufacturer. I have a Moto X, and my camera app is by Motorola, that you know is a phone manufacturer. So you essentially do this. You send an intent to the camera, and you get back the photo almost. So it works in this way. This dispatch take picture intent creates an intent to take a picture. So take picture intent is a new intent, media store action image capture. So you have many of these intents that ask for something please to happen, and you are essentially sending it with a start activity for result. Okay. This means that you not only are launching the intent, but you are expecting the result to come back. Okay, so request image capture, as I think I covered in another class, in a lecture, is this integer that you use as tag. When you want a result back, you have to tag the intent you send out with that integer tag, so that when the response comes back, you can associate the response to your request, okay? So in this case, it won't be a big deal to associate it back, because you usually take one picture at a time. But this means, because you started the activity for result, that you have a matching on activity result method, okay? You have to override the default one. The default on activity result method does exactly nothing, okay? So if you want instead to do something when there is an activity result, you have to override this, and you override it, and you say, okay, this is my request code, so this is what matches the request image capture. The result code is this, it can be result okay, result fail, or these various things, okay? So you basically check that the result was okay, that the person took the photo. Then you do this, you get the bundle from your intent. Where is the intent? Is data, right? The data is the intent. So you get the bundle, and you can get the image map by getting the thing that is tagged with data, okay? And so here you can get the image back very simply. There is only one catch, that what you are getting back here is a down-sampled version of the original image, okay? This is not the full size of the original image, because that would be too large. They don't want to pass multiple megabyte stuff attached to an intent, okay? So this is, I don't know how big it is. I don't know if there is a standard even, but it's a smaller object, okay? So this is how to get a picture if you want a small one. If you want to save the full size image, it's a little bit annoying, because, well, it's not really annoying, but it works in this way. There is an issue of privacy. So in Android, there are two directories in which you can store stuff, okay? And I think I mentioned it in another lecture, but let me say it here, even though it's not explicitly on the slide. One is you get it by saying get files dir, and the other one you get it by saying get text files dir, or maybe get external files dir. I don't remember which one of the two, okay? So you can get either the files dir directory or the external files directory. What's the difference between the two? The external files directory is this space that is shared by all applications. Traditionally, on phones, it used to be on this removable SD card. Now, in newer phones, they tend not to make the SD card removable anymore, or at least I don't know what the newer phones do. Mine don't have it removable anymore, okay? But essentially, this is storage that is shared between all the applications, okay? So it's a file system where there is a directory called photos, and you can put stuff there, but all the other apps will be able to look at it. Instead, if you say get files there, then you get storage that is private to your application, and other applications cannot look into it. Except, of course, if you have a rooted phone and if you do funny stuff, okay? In that case, I don't know what's happening. But if you, unless you do things like that, the information stays private to a particular app. And so you need to decide, and I think that's why they ask you if you want to take a photo and store it, to do something that is sort of awkward, because if I have first to decide where to store it, and then you have to say, please take the photo and store it there, and then it gets stored for you, okay? And this is a little bit awkward, but it's done in such a way that you can decide immediately whether you want to store it privately or non-privately, and that's really a question for for what purpose you are taking the image. If you're just building an app that takes nice pictures of things to I don't know, post on a social site, you might as well leave the pictures in the classical photo directory, because in that way they are visible also via other viewers. If you are building an app that I don't know takes a picture because it really wants to identify somebody's face to let them log into a system or do things like that, then you probably don't want to have those images, sit in the general photo directory, but you want to keep them in your own space and decide when to delete them. Okay, so what you do is this: this is a function that creates an image file. Okay, so this is some sample code to create an image file. So one of the things that is I mean, it's not incredibly difficult when you create files on Android, is this. You are not sitting there to do ls and see the list of all the files you have. So you have to find some way of keeping track of how much space there is, deleting old stuff, and when you create a new stuff, create it in such a way that it has a unique name. This is not very complicated, okay? But you need to take an excellent attention to it. So here what they do is this. They take the date, they use the data to produce a file name, okay? So this is what this does. And then they get, in this case, the external storage public directory for pictures. Okay, so this is a place where the standard pictures are written. Okay, and there they created this temporary file that has a name that is created with the date. Okay, and then yeah, you create this current photo path. Doesn't look very nice, but and you return an image, which is unfortunately a file. I would have called it file, but whatever. Okay. So, and the second part of the code does the following. You create an intent again. You again this take picture intent. Okay. And then you say that photo file is equal to create image file. Okay. And that if photo file succeeds, you put in extra output URI from file, photo file. What is the URI from file? A file path is a file path. And the URI is this thing that has a file : / in front of the file path, okay? So in the end, it will have file : / and then one more slash because it's, you know, the root path of the file, and then the full path to the file. So, but rather than doing the URI yourself by concatenating this file, etc., because if you do that, you get a type string, then you use this URI parser and constructor, okay? So this is better. Essentially, you are building an intent that has this additional information of the file where you should store the result, okay? And you put it into the intent with this media store extra output tag. This is a string. You know, it's a string constant that they define for you. That is the name that they want for the file name. Okay, and then the rest is as before. You request to take a photo, and when the photo is taken, just as before, you get back the preview. Okay, so the small image, and the big image though will be written in the file you have just created. Okay, and of course, you know, you have to watch that there can be out of memory errors, etc., because you know, you created the file, and the error processing for creating the file, you did it yourself, but of course you may run out of space when you try to actually write in the file. Fine. Okay, so you can always resize images. This is an example of how to do it. Okay, so let's see how to do it. So one of the problems, so bitmaps are very flexible objects. The bitmaps are these bit mappings of images. Once you have a bitmap, you can do a lot of things to it. You know, you can resize bitmaps, you can rotate bitmaps. For example, rotating bitmaps is very useful. Suppose you want to make an app in which I don't know, you have a button that says, you know, an icon with a cloud. A cloud has a top and a bottom, no? And you make sure that you want to make sure that when you rotate the phone, this cloud rotates smoothly so that it always stays upside down. You know, there are some of these apps in which, if you rotate the phone from landscape to portrait, you know, the icons stay the good side up, no? So how do you do that? Well, you read the image, you create a bitmap, and then you sense the direction of the phone, and you rotate the bitmap according to the direction of the phone whenever you feel that the phone orientation changes. So you can do all these kind of animations with bitmaps. But a big limitation is that bitmaps have to be small. So in particular, and this is not specified necessarily, but I always used to get out of memory errors if I use a bitmap of size more than 1024 by 1024 and try to do operations on it. Okay, so you may be more lucky, but that's what I got. So essentially, you do this. you have some target width and height, which in this case are set to how big an image is. Then you get then you decode then you essentially you decode in a bitmap options file in this way your image to know how big it should be. Okay, you decide the scaling ratio, and then you decode the file to those options. Okay, so there is a way in which there is a way in which you can first decode it to read how big it is. Then you can essentially set what the scale factor is in these bitmap options, and then you can redecode the file with those options that give the scaling. This is a little bit horrible, okay? I won't hide it from you. But this is how it is done. But once you have the bitmap, you can set it to the image, okay? So the difference is this, that here you set in the options that in just decode bounds is true, which means that I just want to know how big it is. And here instead you actually want to decode it. You know, I find this code thoroughly horrible, but don't blame me, I haven't invented it, okay? I don't know why some things are written so poorly. You would assume that there are ways to decode images that are more insightful than using this silly bitmap factory to decode a file in which you want to have different, you know, there should be different types of decode file operations rather than using passing it to these options and having it work in such a crazy way. But fine, okay. Anyway, bitmap objects are important to know for these reasons. So they may be awkward to get this bitmap factory method, and frankly, the only way I was able to do it is read the documentation of this bitmap factory and look at examples. Once you have them, though, they are fairly flexible. You can set, wherever you can set an image, you can set a bitmap in place. Okay, so whenever you can, all the times in which you can set an image to a button, you can set a bitmap to the button instead, or to a view, or etc., etc. And they're fairly flexible. I only ran into a lot of limitations on bitmap size. And the problem with that is that modern screens are very large, right? Often it is that phones have more pixels than laptops might have, depending on whether we have Retina display or not, you know, but my phone does not. It's a 720p, but it's quite easy to buy a phone that has a 1080p screen, which is better than many laptops. So you have this very large number of pixels on a phone. But if you cannot create bitmaps that have enough resolution, then they don't look well if you scale them very large, right? That's the problem, essentially. So there is a bit of a scaling issue. Now, recording videos. How do you record a video? So the easiest thing is, in this case, to just ask for the video to be recorded for you. There is a little bit of an asymmetry. Okay. There is a little bit of an asymmetry because in this case, you don't need to create the file before you start recording the video. Again, you know, I don't know why they decided on this asymmetric thing with respect to pictures. In a picture, you have to tell them where to store it, and then it's stored where you like. In this case, as you can see, all you do is that you say, you send this action video capture intent, and then you get back the results. And then if the result is okay, then you can get the URI of where the video is stored, which is a file URI, and then you can set it to a video view, which is a video player, and this can play, okay? So playing videos is very easy. If you have a file for a video, you simply need to create a video view, so, okay, and you need to set to the video view the video URI. So the way it works in practice is this. I mean, suppose you want to make a version of, I don't know, Instagram that plays videos, no? So people post videos and then you have a video feed from your friends. How would you do that? Well, you would have to organize it in this way, right? You first have to get from the backend server the metadata. So I know now that my friends A, B, and C all posted videos that shared with me. Okay, so I started to make the feed with A, B, C, and I make it probably in a list view. There is a little bit of difficulty in this kind of things because what you really want to do is this infinitely scrollable list views, and the list view per se is not infinitely scrollable. I don't know if there are helpers. I think there may be helpers with these infinitely scrollable list views that are so common nowadays. Okay, but otherwise, you can detect when you reach the bottom and refresh and update the list to contain more elements. So let's skip a moment to these details. Okay, so you go to your backend, you fetch your list of friends that have shared a video with you. You want to have enough of them to fill at least a few of these videos. Okay, and you make a list view in which every list element contains a bit of text, the name of the friend or whatever, and then it contains a video view. And then for these video views, then what you do in the back. In a process that needs to run asynchronously, okay, maybe in an async task, or more likely you would have to write your own thread, okay. In this back process, you download the videos, okay. You download the videos and you store them to some temporary space, or you keep them in memory structures. But I think it's much easier to just store them to files, temporary files, okay. And then what you do is that you set the video view, like the last statement there, and video view set video URI. Actually, now I'm curious, and I want to go a moment and say and see what are the various methods of video view. Video view Android. Okay, so we can go to the documentation and we can see. I'm interested is on set video path, set video URI, and that's basically it. Then you can start and stop it, etc. And you can decide whether it's attached to window or not, and you can do various other things. Okay, so I mean, you can check whether it's playing. You can see how much it's playing. But the idea is essentially that controlling video play is very difficult, and so it's done for you by the video view. All you do is set to the file, because in a video view usually they're displayed the usual controls, so that you can start, stop, you can skip ahead with your finger, you can scrub it and then go to the place where you want to play. And so all of this is difficult to do, and the video view really wants to have the file, so that it can, fast forward inside the file to the place where you want to play and implement all the movie playing algorithms, essentially. So it's all done for you, okay? So coming back to the presentation, recording videos is mostly done for you. You get the file back, okay? Now, then there is a different way of doing things in which you actually control the camera. Okay, so if you want to control the camera, you can you can have a lot more freedom, and you do it in this way. So first of all, there is some way to open the camera. Okay, so this is the crucial line. Sorry, my camera is equal to camera.openID. Okay, here this hides some complexity. Again, some phones have a back camera, other phones don't have a back camera. Okay, so for some phones, the back camera is the main camera. Some phones, the front camera is the main camera. Some phones have only the front camera, and then they call the front back camera, so you go nuts. But essentially, if you open a camera with the idea of 0, that's the main camera of the phone. Okay? Then there are constants that are called front camera and back camera. You don't know whether 0 is the front or back. If you have a tablet, like if you have an Amazon Fire, I don't think the old Amazon Fire has a back camera. So if you take an old tablet that doesn't have a back camera, camera 0 is the front camera because it's the only one. So you cannot be sure, you can ask the phone, there are ways to say, do you have a back camera, do you have a front camera? Or you can try to open it. Yeah.
Pinch the try catch.
Sorry?
Pinch the try catch.
Hence the right catch, because you cannot be sure that you succeed in opening the camera. You cannot succeed for two reasons. One is that the camera may not exist, the one you want. And so you need to catch it. I think that we do is this. At least that's what we can do. I try to open the camera you want. I try to do a try catch. If I don't succeed, I try to open camera 0. I write in the preferences what I discover about your cameras. So if I succeed opening it with 0, 1, front and back, I have some preference that sort of tells me which cameras we have, just because I like to write it, and so that I know it, what I succeeded to open, right? The other reason you may not succeed in opening the camera is that if an app is using the camera, it essentially locks the camera. If it exits, another camera cannot use it in the meantime. Okay, the camera is exclusive user resource. And this is also annoying because it means that if an app crashes in a funny way without releasing the camera, occasionally you notice that another camera cannot possibly open the camera. Another app cannot possibly open the camera. And then you need to sort of first kill the application from the settings menu or reboot the phone occasionally if it goes in a funny state. So complications, so many complications, but generally that's why you need the try catch, because you're not sure that these things will succeed. Okay. Then you need to have a preview surface. You can create this preview surface from Android Studio among the UI surfaces, and you can set the camera to that preview surface. Before you do this, the phone cannot take photos. This is a limitation that is aimed at ensuring privacy. Okay. Essentially, they want to give the user some idea that the camera is on before taking pictures. Otherwise, they can write an app that while you use the phone is taking pictures of you without telling you. Okay. So of course, you can do so many things that break your privacy in Android, but this particular one, they thought it was too much. Okay. Because I mean, how many apps that have no business looking at my photos ask for the photo permission? Right? For example, Open Table, just to name one of those. I don't know what they do with the photo permission, but they want it. Why? I don't know. Okay, so you need to create a preview. Creating the preview is a little bit difficult because you have to implement the preview, the surface holder callback. So essentially, if you do a camera preview, you need to implement some methods that call you back whenever the surface that is doing the preview is modified or certain events happen. The most typical thing you need to do is that okay, so this is how you create it. I think we will see later the method for that implements the callback. So yes, we will see it in the sorry, 1 second, I'm reading. Yeah, sorry, it's here the callback, but let me go to this code first. So you need to create a preview, and I think the only thing that is complicated is boiler code is this. So you are giving that the type is a surface type push buffers. I don't know. This is all kind of gobbledygook. I mean, I don't know exactly why they have you go into these details, because essentially the user typically doesn't care. Like, this is the only choice that you can reasonably use for a preview of this type, as far as I know, surface type push buffers. But essentially, you are building a preview in which you are saying, okay, fine, this is a preview, and people can push new bitmaps that will be shown on this preview. This is what this is saying. Okay. Once you created the preview, you can set and start the preview in this way. This, you get the camera object that you have opened. When you open the camera, you get a camera object. This sets the camera to the preview. Okay. And what you do is this. you get the supported preview size. You try to match the sizes, and you say that the camera has set to the preview size this holder that holds the preview. Okay, so and then you start the flow of information from the camera to the preview. Okay, so this is essentially boilerplate code that one needs to use in order to start the camera preview. And the other thing you need to do is this, that you have to implement this surface, change the callback in the surface holder, because you need to be able to set the preview size in the preview itself. So there are these few things that you need to do for controlling the preview. Okay, so then you can essentially, this is information that is also on the Android developers thing. So maybe I should just focus on the new information I can add that you cannot read when you go there. So there is some shutter callback that is called to you when you get the shutter, and the important things are these: that when you take a picture, in the end, you pass to the camera these callbacks that tell you, one, when the shutter has been pressed, two, that get the JPEG image back, and three, that get the raw image back. The raw image, not in the sense of camera raw, but in the sense of simply an array of pixel values that you can process in any way you want. Okay, so you define the shutter callback, the raw callback, the JPEG callback, in which here you are simply storing the file, okay? And then you say, camera, take picture, shutter callback, raw callback, JPEG callback. These callbacks can be empty, but this, when you say that, the camera will essentially display some sort of shutter button, and when the user presses the shutter button, you get called back. You get notified by the shutter callback that the user pressed the shutter. You get notified by the raw and JPEG callbacks about the image that has been just stored. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Except that when a picture is taken, you need to restart the preview manually. And so for example, you can have an on-click of a view. This is unfortunately a bit complicated because you need to ask whether the preview is frozen or not. Okay, but you essentially have to try to detect when a picture has been taken, and if it is frozen, you restart the preview. Okay, so it's a little bit annoying actually. Okay, how to do all these things. I mean, it's a lot of boilerplate code for something that should be simple. And the truth is that you don't gain very much. All you gain if you do this is that you get a raw file, I believe, because otherwise you can use an intent and you can get the JPEG, you can decode it, and there you are, right? So I've never actually done this. This is why I sound a little bit fuzzy when I sort of describe it, to be quite frank. Then you can also release the camera, okay? And this is important to do, actually. So yes, I don't see a huge benefit of doing this. This is also because, in fact, when you want to do things that are more complicated with the camera, the best thing to do is not to roll your own. The problem is this: what do you do really once you have the pixel values? It's have to do with very interesting stuff directly in Java, because an image is large, and if you write your code that iterates over the image in Java, it's not going to be incredibly efficient. I mean, it's going to be somewhat efficient, but not super efficient. Maybe you disagree because Java now is very fast. No, it is somewhat fast, but not super fast. And also, it's kind of difficult to write many sophisticated image algorithms by hand from scratch. So the great solution to this is to use something called OpenCV, Open Computer Vision. Okay, the Open Computer Vision is an open source package that is available for many computing platforms. It's available in particular for C, it has bindings from Python, and it has also bindings for Java from Android. Okay, and also from iOS, I believe. I'm sure, in fact, even though I've never used it from iOS. And OpenCV is a fairly complete image processing library. It can actually, if you want, to take pictures for you. Okay, so you can, if you want to use OpenCV to process pictures, you can do either one thing that is fairly simple. That is, you have the camera take the picture. Then once you have the picture, you tell OpenCV open this picture file and create an image object. So OpenCV has this structure that is called MAT. MAT for matrix. MAT, maybe I should say that is M-A-T, max. So I read it MAT. Maybe I don't know how would you read it. But I read it MAT. So MAT is essentially a native, C matrix or C++ matrix that is wrapped around by some things that are able to deallocate the memory when you stop using it, and with a reference counter that counts how many references there are outstanding to this matrix. Okay, so it does all the memory allocation management to tie the Java memory management to the underlying C++ code. MAT is a wrapper on top of a C++ matrix. Okay. And so you can in OpenCV say MAT my image is equal to OpenCV.openFile. I forgot the exact instruction, but we could look it up easily, of this file. And once you have a MAT object in OpenCV, there is a very large number of operations that you can do. And that, I think, is far more interesting than trying to roll your own. You can change the color, you can increase the saturation, you can increase the sharpness, you can blur the image. You can, correct the color balance. You can, and then, people invented all kind of nice algorithms on top of it. For example, if you want to do a pictorial effect on somebody's face, if it's painted, I think there is already a mode that tries to find regions of similar colors and make the color identical to make this pictorial effect. So there are these pictorial effects, and then there are also more sophisticated things. For example, there are image object detection libraries or the functionality. You may have to train them and create a training file. And for example, if your problem is finding your TMAG at home, you can take a lot of pictures of TMAGs and you can teach it what is a TMAG. You create a training file, and then when you move your phone around, it can recognize your TMAG. Okay, I mean, you can do all these kind of things. So it's actually very, very useful and highly recommended. The way to install it it has become very simple to install it actually under Android Studio. What you do is, you know that what I did for the event bus library, that I had to add that one line to the build Gradle file, right? So you again add one line to the build Gradle file. You also have to add some native libraries under the libs folder. This is all documented in the OpenCV page for Android. Maybe I can search for it. But I don't know how quickly I'm able to land on it, but I can try, okay? Let me just see. OpenCV Android. Okay, so if you go here, this tells you precisely how to start. Information of OpenCV. So this is a tutorial. OpenCV Android development. You can look at those tutorials. You can look at the Android samples. I don't know. I wonder if there is a simple one to use. And then there is a large amount of documentation that tells you. The documentation is not super easy to find. I think that I had to download it at some point, but. Okay, so this is it. Okay, so it's not in super pretty format. But for example, in core, there are many of these. No, core contains basically these constants. But then it contains all these operations. You can sum. You can compute the distance between two matrices, which means you can. What would be the use of sum? Well, I mean, suppose you want to do a double exposure effect, then you take an image, you multiply it by 1/2, you take another image, you multiply it by 1/2, and then you sum them. No, you can do all these things. You can check how big they are. You can draw circles. You can draw shapes. you can do a lot of stuff. I mean, you really have to explore it. There is a very, very large amount of capabilities here, okay? So you can do machine learning classification. You can do feature detection, which is what I was talking about, to detect objects or faces. You can do image segmentation. You can do in algorithm. I think you can find a lot of these algorithms, such as hold on. Okay, so I admit I get lost in this documentation because things are not always in the place I expect them. But I've used it extensively, even though I forget when particular functions are. And you can do pretty much what you want. In fact, there is also another way of using it that you can find in the tutorials that does the following. You actually don't use the phone to take pictures. OpenCV for Android has a low-level interface to the camera that people build. And it's difficult to build it because they really have to essentially interface to many camera drivers. It does not work with all cameras, okay? So the safest way if you just want to take a picture is to take the picture with a phone camera app, get a file, and then open the file with OpenCV and process it. But otherwise, if you want, you can, for example, tell OpenCV to take charge of the camera, and it is able to take pictures continuously at, I don't know, 10 or 15 frames per second and pass them to you for processing. So, for example, if you use a face detection algorithm, you can build yourself something that, you know, as you swoop the phone around, is counting how many people there are in the room, because it counts how many faces, tracks them. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but you can do it, okay? It detects the faces, tracks them, and adds them up as you go, right? You can build all these kind of applications. So, yeah. So, I don't know. So, yeah, so I wanted to show you the classes for blurring, and I used to know where it is, but now I forgot. But I think we can do Android, Java, OpenCV, blur, and at least it will tell me where it is. Okay, it's in image porch. I should have guessed it. Okay, but there is this class image porch here. Where was it? It should have been here. Image porch. Yeah, but I was there, but I simply lost it then. Oh yeah, because it's very large. So this image porch class is huge, has a huge number of methods, and you know, you can equalize the histogram so that it equalizes the brightness of your image. It can do this dilation and summarization, which, you know, it changes the size of the image. It can do these topological transformations. For example, one thing you can do is that you can find anything that has color green, and then you can dilate it. Dilate it means that you try to complete it. You try to make it into a more regular shape by a process of first enlarging it and then shrinking it in certain ways. Okay, so yeah, imagine that you do the following to a set of pixels. First, you say, well, you have a set of pixels that it can be 0 or 1, and you do this. Let me use the board, otherwise I have to explain all that. It's a very critical processing thing we may want to do. Let me see if I can switch on the light. So often you want to try to get an object that you have a noisy answer. So suppose that at the beginning you know that there is these. So these are your original pixels, but you would like to have a rounder shape, so to say. So a typical operation you can do is this. First you do a dilation. That is, everything that is next to a colored pixel you also color. Okay, and so you start to color. I color them in this way because they are not the original color. So you start to color all these pixels. Okay, So these pixels get colored as well because they touch by a side or a corner a colored pixel. Then you do a step of erosion in which you do the opposite. Every pixel that is next to a non-colored pixel gets deleted. Okay? So you think that this has no effect in total, but it's not true. Because all these pixels get reset to 0, right? But this pixel stays colored. So essentially, this is used to regularize images, so that if you have small irregularities, holes into them, or small dents into them, they get filled up. Okay, so this is a very common image operation, and it's very expensive to do if you were to do it in Java, because if you were to do it in Java, you would have to essentially iterate multiple times over all the pixels. And for every pixel, you would have to look at all the 9 neighbors in order to do it. If you do it in OpenCV, this does it using a native library that even uses a little bit of machine assembly language to do it efficiently. And so this is dilation and erosion of the two operations. You know, this is erode. Erodes an image by using a specific structural element. The structural element is this. When I was doing the dilation and the erosion, I was looking at the neighborhood of size 9. Okay? And so the structural element that you pass to it would have to be this. They want you to pass a matrix of ones. Okay, that you can create. You can look at the instructions on how to create it. That's so you can do all these operations. So there is a huge number of them. Okay. I mean, you need to study a bit of image processing or look at a little bit of these things in order to use them all. But basically, it's a playground. Also, I can tell you experimentally that some of these things are really well done, and some of these things are not really well done. Meaning that it's very the time it takes to do these things is very variable. Okay. For example, I discovered I was taking images from OpenCV. And I discovered that if you have 2 images, one of the simplest things I can think of is to take their linear combination. No? So you say alpha 1 plus 1 minus alpha the other, where you know, where you have the 2 images, and my images were of size not so much, they were like HD images simply, in 1920 times 1084. Okay, and this was taking. This was reducing the FPS at which I could process the images from something like 10 to something like 2. So essentially, it was taking the best of 300 milliseconds just to do this. It was crazily slow. I don't know why it was so slow. Okay, I think it was so slow because somehow, this is my interpretation, but somehow they were checking the types of the bits for each time they were combining them, instead of deciding that, okay, this is you know, you can write the code in 2 ways. You can write a loop, you loop over the pixels, but you use the pixels in these generic container types in computer science. So they say, oh, this is a pixel, but now I only tell you the type. And so you cast it to the right type, you sum it together, and you recast it to the result type, and you do that, right? Or else you can have sort of specialized linear combination functions in which you assume that the arguments and the result are of the same type. Somehow, they seem to have only the inefficient version. Okay, I don't know why. Maybe I was doing it wrong. But the simple linear combination function was incredibly slow. Other things like Gaussian blur, they're very efficient. They're very well implemented. You know, it's hard. This is a collective effort, and you know, many people work on it. And some things received a lot of love and attention and optimization, and some things less. Right? I cannot. This is the way things work. Okay, so so this is it for image processing. I really recommend the OpenCV library. Actually, I don't know what would you like to do next time. Are there any wishes? We could play a little bit with this image processing, perhaps. That could be one of the applications. What's a wish for next time? We can do anything. I mean, provided that I can do it, you know, but I'm not sure I can do it, everything. But so.
Well, a lot of professors, you know, when there's nothing else to do, they just sort of use it as a platform to talk about whatever they want.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm wondering if there is any wish here.
Yeah.
Um,
I can't really think of anything in particular. I mean, there's no way that you can tell us absolutely everything that we're going to need to know to be an Android developer.
no, in fact, but what would I mean? I don't. I'm essentially wondering. Are you interested enough in image processing that I should try to build an app tomorrow? I'm sure something on Thursday, or is this not central enough that you prefer me to do other stuff? This is a binary choice because it takes me, it's always simple, but it takes me a few hours to build that app. I mean, I have some other app that kind of works, right? But I need to clean it up of all the pieces that are not interesting. I need to check that it still works with the latest version of OpenCV. I mean, it takes time. So, is this relevant enough? I don't see maybe a huge amount of interest.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, but if it's only one, then it's a few hours. But
I'm working on different Android projects for actually a different class, where I'm trying to make a scrolling background. But it's going to scroll vertically, it's not going to scroll horizontally, which is the problem.
yes, how are you doing that?
That's the thing, I'm looking around right now on how to create a scrolling vertical background in Android.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what a good solution is. Let's see. I mean, of course, a simple solution doesn't work, but it would be kind of handy. I mean, I assume that the computer, how do you compute your scrolling background?
I mean, I'm basically saying if the thing I want to follow as is the end of canvas, redraw the canvas. That's what I'm thinking of doing.
Yeah, but what do you have? You have like a long image, or you have like a series of long images?
No, I'm drawing shapes on the canvas right now.
Ah, but then you can do it as a drawing program.
Yeah.
Right? You can just draw, I guess.
And then you can determine where you are and draw from that point. So,
Yeah, you can do it like a sort of animation movie, but I mean, that would be the easiest.
one thing that you might cover is, I noticed that like when people are developing for Android, they don't always just use the standard Android SDK, and they don't always just use like Android Studio. They'll oftentimes be using a game engine or some kind of other platform to develop, like maybe a game or some other kind of special app for Android. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, at least briefly, about that kind of stuff. That'd be something I could.
Yes. So no, I was hoping someone of you would talk about it actually, because I know that some people who use Unity. Really use Unity. Yeah. I see. Because people in the games, I think it's called computational media department, do these, and so if there would be any volunteer. Yeah, because if you have already an example that works with Unity, maybe you can present it for half an hour or less.
I don't have one on me, but I could take one of the Unity projects, compile it to Android.
Yeah.
I mean, this would be great because I don't do I mean, I've seen it done and I think it's very beautiful, but I don't have an example that I ran already. I don't have Unity then. Yeah.
Well, they just got released for free this year, so Unity's free out of it.
Ah, okay. One other thing that I was missing. Okay, great.
Yeah, it used to be, you have to use that for but a lot of people, so you can build a game in Unity. I don't know, just like really easy. The most, like the difficult part is making it like playable on Android device. Because you have to deal with like all the screens. I talked a lot about making location on the screen relative to the size of the screen. A lot of people are starting or they're not five, so like that's really important for this sort of stuff because like who knows how it's going to be all the time. And you want to look the same way you look at the computer, building the community. And then from there you also have to deal with trying to get their actual like phone input. So you can't have like WASD moving around because they don't have WASD and on the phone. And they also like a personal phone also doesn't have a mouse to click on things. So like that's something that as many like click as possible.
Yeah, we could cherry rig WASD.
But it's only the old, yes.
No,
but like keyboard. Like just Unity phone with, yeah, you would
Does Unity have its own library that reads the gestures from the screen, or if you touch this, you click on this there? Like,
That's what I'm not sure of. I haven't tried that. But what I do think you can do is you can edit the application. And just saying, you could just like hard coding all the goals to correspond to the.
Is the output of Unity for Android somewhat applicable Java or some?
Open it up right now, actually.
it's really hard by JavaScript.
Okay, but maybe this is what to do next time. I see if I can have a simple example of OpenCV that works on Android, and we can talk about Unity. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I like the assignment two, I think, the one with like the messaging. I would be interested in learning more about like how, you know, phones communicate with like servers and stuff. Like maybe like have some kind of interaction with like phones, you know, like to and from like words with friends who are like actually.
Okay. Okay. So but I already thought in general how to communicate with a server. So what should I be done particularly that was interested you, or what should I, you know, what would you like to know next time?
It's really hard to say actually. Like, don't have any specific example. So
Maybe that's some specific question that you would like, you know, imagine you're doing the application now that you want to do. Where would you log it? What would be the next question? And you can also even increase so if you like, but then or else you can just ask next time and we can sort of take it as a starting point to talk more.
and just encryption, I guess. I'd like to know like how to make you know, the actual messages being sent like private.
Oh, this is a moment of time. So from encryption, there is one very easy thing in Android compared to the web essentially. That on the web, it's not really that you have to convince people to use SSL. No, but essentially you are displaying to people the URL you are using. In Android, when you do this calls to the backend, nobody sees the URL you are using. Okay? So you can use any ID URL that processes SSL. I say this because if you host the systems at scale, it's sometimes difficult to get a URL that is has SSL but forwards to the multiple backends on the right way or whatever. But in this case, you can really decide the URL schema and the URL you talk to, and nobody sees it, and so you can always process SSL in the communication. So the encryption and keeping the phone and the server is simply taken care of. You need to buy an SSL certificate, okay? And the SSL certificates, I think someone of you was buying one this year. Who did it? Maybe it was from the web class. And they were able to buy it at an even better price. I bought one, I think, at $60 for 2 weeks. The last one I bought for Rapid SSL. But there are many vendors, yeah.
There's a free vendor. It's like not the best. It's like it's.
Yeah, I think that the only trouble with the SSL vendors is that they need to be recognized by the browsers. So, you know, Android does not have a complete list of, the certificate has to be signed in a certain way. So what happens if you buy a certificate from a vendor, okay? What happens is essentially is that suppose you do that my company that is called example.com and that buy your certificate, say, from rapidssl.com. What you download is a chain of certificates. One that says rapidssl.com is certified by one of these top level domains. Okay, top level certificate authorities. So, okay, so there is a chain of certificates. Let me write on the board again. I tell you this obscure part of internet, so and it is also obscure. That there is a certain number of certificate authorities. Okay. What is the most famous is him in the Bay Area, and he's oh, come on, you can help me. He's well, it's SSL itself. No, how it is called? VeriSign. No, VeriSign is probably the most famous. But you know, you can use a rapid SSL or you can use a. I call it some SSL. Okay, just not to advertise a particular brand. So some SSL has a certificate that can say this is really the some SSL server. Okay, and then you buy your certificate, for example, .com. Okay, and this has another certificate signed by SSL. So this certificate, in the idea is this is public and private key recovery, right? This certificate is signed by some SSL. There is a public key that everybody has of some SSL. And using the public key that is in web distribution, people can check that this certificate is really signed by them. Except you don't know who they are. And so you have another certificate that says that these people are really them, and is signed by one of these top certificate authorities. And these top certificate authorities, everybody has their certificate on Android itself. So the Android devices that you have on them already installed a certain number of top-level certificates for these certificate authorities. Okay, so the certificates to these are embedded in the device. Okay, so when you buy an SSL domain, for example, from your site, what you get is not one certificate, but if you're careful, you need to download all the certificate chain that goes to the top level. Okay. Now, once you have the certificate chain, you have to upload it or cause it to be served on demand by your web server. This is done in different ways, and I don't know all the possible ways. I know that in Apache, you put the certificate chains in a certain place, and you tell Apache that they are there, in the configuration file. I know that for Google App Engine, there is a way in the console that has changed since the last time I did it, most likely. But if you look at the Google documentation, there is a way in which you essentially have to rather awkwardly concatenate these two certificates in a single file and upload them both. Okay. Once you do that, what you can do is this. So let me go to, for example, to the site for which I did it. So well, we could do it for Facebook, I guess, but let me do it for my site. So let me see if I can. It doesn't load. Hey. Yeah, but I wanted HTTPS. Strange. Okay, there it is. So if you click here, no, how do I click there in the right way? Sorry? All right. Okay, so this is a certificate chain. Okay, so I can click on certificate information. Okay, and you can see that the GeoTrust Global Certificate Authority has certified Rapid SSL that has certified Internal Crowd Grader. So this is the certificate chain to my certificate. Okay, and you can look at the details and see, you know, how this was issued of each one of these two. This is the one for Crowd Grader, and this is the one for Rapid SSL. Okay. And this is the top level one. Okay, and you can do it for any site. For example, if you now go to HTTPS Facebook or like google.com, even if I just go to the homepage of Google and the HTTPS, I can click here and hold on. Okay. And so instead they bought it from Equifax, then GeoTrust, Google Internet Authority G2, and Google.com. So they have more levels, I guess. Okay. So this, by the way, is one of the problems of these certificate authorities. These certificate authorities are a crucial point of weakness of the internet, right? Because if I want to say that I'm Wells Fargo and so you should bank with me and RSS, then what I can do is this. If I hack into a certificate authority, I can easily have a certificate that is signed by the certificate authority to some fake intermediate to me, to my fake website, saying that I'm Wells Fargo. Okay? So So you can do this if you can hack it. You know, it's a chain of trust. If you break any point in the chain of trust, you have gained access to it, essentially. And so if you can, this is the problem where there is a lot of political contention about where the certificate authorities should be. Okay, if you have these certificate authorities in places where hacking is more frequent, where you feel that government intervention may cause these certificates to be corrupted and not to be kept independently, then big trouble can happen to the security of the internet. And this is why there is a lot of political wrangling about exactly which certificates, which top-level certificates should be included in things like Android or Windows or other distributions. And I think that Android recently dropped some top-level certificate authorities because they were deemed to be unreliable. They had security trouble in the past. They were deemed to be unreliable, and they were dropped. Okay, so this is for encryption. But so as long as you buy your certificates and you have the chain of certificates, you cannot really do very much better than that. Okay, so the encryption part is of SSL that does not depend on these certificates. The encryption part works and is very hard to break. What the certificates essentially do is that they guarantee that you're talking to the person you are talking. Okay, and the way it works is this: that if you connect to Wells Fargo, you do two things: that you essentially get the certificate from Wells Fargo, and then you independently verify that the chain of trust is valid. And then you know that the other person on the other end must have provided you with the correct certificate. Okay, for that server. So this is essentially how it works. Now. Now there is the bigger question of whether to keep the data encrypted in the cloud, but almost nobody does it. And you can encrypt it at this layer. That is common. And I think Google encrypts and compresses information in their data centers. That yes. But the fact is that you need typically to be able to search this information and to process it. And even though there is a lot of theoretical work on how to do processing with privacy, so how you can encrypt the data in such a way that you can still do indexing and processing of the data, in practice, I've never ever seen this done. It's essentially impossible to use data in your code while the data is still encrypted. So usually in the cloud, the servers have access to the non-encrypted data. The only exception is passwords. You avoid storing plain text passwords. I mean, Sony didn't avoid it, but normally people avoid storing plain text passwords. One thing, by the way, that I don't know how many people realize, and you realize only when you, CloudGuard doesn't store any password, so I'm actually absolutely innocent. But if I made a website that stores passwords, it's hard for people to realize that it's really extremely easy for me to build up a website that stores password, username, password pairs. And then if I know that Joe has password pizza, then I can also try to see if it works on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So the idea of people that are using the same password becomes incredibly absurd once you start actually building a website. I just say this in parentheses because you believe that there is no human behind the operation, and you believe that your password is not stored in a way that people can read. But this is your belief. You actually don't know. You don't know what people are doing with the information you give them. And so if you give them a very useful username password pair, I would not assume that there is not anybody listening there that is not going to use the same one in other sites. So I don't reuse any password. I don't reuse any password that hides any secret information. There are sites in which I essentially have to create username and password pairs, but I could care less what they contain. No, there I reuse it, but not otherwise. So the link is extremely weak there to security. Now, the beauty of Android is that actually, I don't know if I'm out of time. Yeah, I'm almost out of time, but let me say just this. The beauty of Android is that if you are looking for you can, in many instances, avoid the username password creation. Okay? So, for example, what can you do if you want to communicate from phone to phone? You can either ask for the permission to read the phone information, and you can read the phone number and use that as username. or else you can read the name of the user of the Google account. I think I have sample code even in this class that lists the names of the Google accounts, or else you can easily find it, okay? So that gives you the username. What do you use as password? But this is quite easy. So first of all, you may not need a password. A person can only add a Google account to their phone if they originally knew the password. So you can essentially believe that they are pre-verified unless you what you are doing is high security. For your app, I don't know. Yeah, no. I mean, you would be able to avoid a password, but then if people they install the app and reinstall it, they wouldn't have access to the raw data. That would be the problem. So they would really have to do user or something like that. Otherwise, you can just invent a random number, so it on the phone at the first time the app is used in the app settings, and you can use that. But then if people install the app, they wouldn't have it.
I think an issue with using just the Google account might be that I guess you have some sort of, you're carrying some sort of risk of if their Google account gets compromised, then their account with your service is no longer have confidence that their account with your service is still valid. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. But would it matter?
So it's like if I log in with my Google account or like automatically on my phone, and I guess you're a bank or something, and then someone steals my Google account, logs in from a different phone to your bank. Now, the bank is carrying the risk of my responsibility with my Google account.
Yes, but
So like now if something happens and someone withdraws everything,
yeah, but I'm not sure it's a real risk because of. I mean, suppose my site has a button that says log me out, in which case I can check again that it has a Google account. But more fundamentally, typically if you have a Google account on the phone, all these sites have this way of saying reset my password, and so if you have the Google account on the phone, you would get the password via Gmail. So I don't know. We need to be convinced that you're not in bigger trouble already, I guess.
there was a case where my Nexus 5 had someone else's Google account.
Okay, yeah, but this is a super risk for the person already, right? Because you could already go like to Facebook and say, I forgot my password, and send me the password, and then you would be able to set a password on Facebook that he doesn't know.
That's true.
And lock him out.
Yeah.
And then you can change an email address the day after, and he's locked, and you took over his Facebook.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Okay, I'm not giving you advice. I'm just responsible, never believe it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's true.
I mean, it's difficult to do this chain link of analysis. So what the advice I'm giving is essentially not for high security sites. It's just for this sort of lightweight social sites that have a little bit of information. If you, by the way, the biggest threat, we should stop this lecture, but the biggest threat to security, in my opinion,